Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info. Happy Mother's Day, first of all, to all of you out there. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter show here tonight. The reason for that will be made clear a little bit later in the show here. But first and foremost, let's talk about the action from this weekend's action here. Throwback weekend at the Darlington Raceways. You see, I got my 2001 motif here with my Buckshot Jones hat and Robbie Gordon and Morgan McClure's number 4 shirt. That was my fit for this weekend here. William Byron back in victory lane brings back the old Chrome Illusion paint scheme there. I wasn't sure. I was skeptical about this during last week's show about how well that car was going to look with a wrap instead of the painting, or at least not direct paint like used to be there. But very nice. I mean, the car looked great out there when it was, especially it seemed like the roof rails and the accents there on the fenders there seemed to really catch the light quite well. And luckily the weather cooperated to really bring that into focus. And no doubt the car looked its best when it was going on its way to victory there after pretty much everybody else that was up front had some kind of misfortune or another. Byron having a series of bad pit stops there that kind of put him back in the order, but was managing to, really kind of get up there at the right time with all these late race restarts. And Byron continues to be one of these drivers that really seems to capitalize on the way the modern races play out here with late race restarts and multiple overtime finishes and whatnot there. So kudos to him. He pulls off another victory this year, his first since Phoenix, the 100th for the number 24 team. Tremendous to have Jeff Gordon there among the other dignitaries on hand for the 75 greatest drivers deal this weekend. A lot of great throwback action this weekend. And on top of this, I think a Darlington race that we had today was a perfect mix of both kinds of racing we usually see at this track. Both very physical, with people bouncing off the outside wall and trying to just make sure their cars last to the end, and long green flag runs where you can't afford have a lot of contact out there because you're going to find yourself in trouble in the very early laps here. Your last place finish battle was pretty much open and closed on this one. BJ McLeod seemed to have a lot of struggles at the beginning of this event. Unscheduled stop at the very beginning, dropping him a few laps down. Brennan Poole apparently dropped some fluid on the track there to draw a caution about 39 laps into the race. The crew was working on the right rear of the car. It looked like maybe a transaxle issue. It did look like the fender was scuffed up a bit, but unfortunately he went back behind the wall, took last from BJ, and was ultimately out of the race, listed out because of a transaxle issue, which is the first time that has happened in the Cup Series, Xfinity, or Truck Series race. Not the first time that a driver has fallen out because of that issue. Of course, you think back to Denny Hamlin missing his shift there last year, but the first time it's actually resulted in a last place finish in a Cup Series points race. And actually, Xfinity and Trucks have also not had that happen yet. So it's a first time on all three of those fronts. It also puts Brennan Poole as to the 42nd driver that has completed the last car Triple Crown. He actually just scored his first Xfinity and Truck Series last place runs last year. He was also your last place finisher in Friday's truck race, driving for G2G Racing. Unfortunately, blown engine there at the beginning of that race with some nose damage there. Another rough evening for the G2G effort as they tried to run 2 trucks here these last couple of weeks. We'll see what their situation is going to be for North Wilkesboro next week, which is no doubt going to be a very high-profile race to kind of kick off the NASCAR portion of that weekend as well. But Brennan Poole, it's his first last place finish in the Cup Series, which is how he's completed the Triple Crown here, a race that in 2020 he was actually up front for a lap before falling out with transmission issues during that first Wednesday race after the schedule resumed that spring. But that is going to be your story pending the results of post-race inspection tonight. Makes one wonder what NASCAR is going to be inspecting from a lot of these other cars out there. A lot of torn up equipment, unfortunately, in the second half of this race. Big pile up off of turn number 2 that collected a lot of the drivers that were involved in the bottom 5. Michael McDowell, Daniel Suarez, and Austin Dillon were eliminated in that wreck. Other drivers suffered damage in that, including Kevin Harvick, who bounced back to get a runner-up finish in the race today. Looked like he had a shot at possibly pulling off his first victory of the season, and a bit of a recovery there from that disappointment back at Phoenix, which Byron also won, but unfortunately was not meant to be there. Both of them did a great job jumping ahead of everybody else but unfortunately, things didn't shake out quite as well for the number 4 team. Have to settle for the runner-up finish there. Completing the bottom 5, incidentally, was BJ McLeod. Again, touching on him a little bit earlier here with him struggling with the car's handling at the very beginning. Over the radio, he was just frustrated. The car was just slow. Seemed like there wasn't any particular handling adjustments they could make to make the car handle better. It's an unfortunate deal. I'm very, because I was very pleased with, the other YouTubers and stuff that were on board there. You got Eric Estep, Black Flags Matter, the Iceberg, Danny B. And then on top of that, the Garage Guys and the NASCAR Scene Vault podcast jumping on board. I think it gave some cool exposure to all of them. Looked like they had a great time this weekend. I certainly hope they did. Good to see them get out there on that for sure. Completing your bottom 10 finishers, Martin Truex, Josh Berry, Ross Chastain, Ryan Newman, and Ty Dillon there. A lot of stories in that group there. Truex looked very good out there for a lot of this race. Looked like he was going to be practically unstoppable. Certainly his crew chief was very excited about that in the early laps as some of the commentary was transcribed. There were others on Twitter earlier today. But unfortunately, one of those incidents there at the very end. We saw so much of this here in the latter parts of this race. Drivers kind of merging up into somebody else and just kind of forcing them into a situation where, they could back off or they could just get wrecked. That's a wonderful strategy that you could try in most other tracks. Problem at Darlington is that high lane is the groove and there really is nowhere else to go. And if you back off, you're going to get run over. So I'm a little dismayed by this strategy that's kind of taken up here. It certainly was a factor in the Xfinity race there as well. And I don't care if John Hunter Nemechek was okay with the finish of that. It was still the second straight Xfinity race where Kyle Larson affected the outcome of a race that he shouldn't have been in as a Cup Series champion, regular playoff contender, goes in there and just, muscles some other guy out of the way. That's a full-time guy. Let's not forget the fact that Kyle Larson was one that kept Sheldon Creed out of the championship battle last year when Creed was about to go for the win last September. I think if it turned out to be a guy like that in this situation and they were, bounced off him there at the finish line, probably wouldn't have played quite the same. I know it's easy to what if everything about this, but I stand by what I said on Saturday there. I think that it's just another example of, these Xfinity drivers, if they're going to do that, they're perfectly capable of doing that against each other. They don't need a Cup guy in there. And I think the other problem with it is that it's going to give people the impression that you need to have Cup guys in these races to make them exciting, which is not at all true. We've seen, I think the only reason that you've had Xfinity guys that are able to race these Cup guys as good as they've been is because the Cup guys have been kept out of the series as much as they have. So the level of talent that's in there is a lot better. And you've got guys like John Hunter Nemechek, who admittedly have run Cup full time. And Cole Custer and John Hunter Nemechek and other drivers of that nature. You already have that Cup experience in there. So you don't need to have an elite Cup driver that's winning races and championships mixing it up there. I know I'm bouncing back and forth between the 3 races this weekend, but I definitely got to get that off my chest right at the beginning here. And as I said with Jeff Gluck's tweet there, again, it could be both. It can be both an exciting finish and a really thrilling way to end a race, which undoubtedly it was. I'm not going to say it's bad racing. It was absolutely fantastic. And yes, it did bring back memories of that 2003 Spring Busch Series race where Todd Bodine and Jimmy McMurray locked bumpers at a time where McMurray was a full-time Cup guy as well. Again, you can have driver, or actually Todd Bodine was too, come to think of it. A great battle between a couple drivers there, but did it have to be Cup guys to put on a show like that? I don't think so. They could put it on just as good a show in the Cup Series race the next day there. So it's an unfortunate situation. I know that people are going to say, "Oh, that's just being you don't like racing if you don't have a complaint with this finish." I don't get. I don't agree with that. I don't think that you could still enjoy the spectacle of race and how crazy it is, and still take issue with maybe how it kind of played out. And we've seen so much of this, and I know we've seen a lot of it especially, and I think this is where Ross Chastain gets a lot of this attention here. If it were Ross Chastain in that same situation and Chastain won that race, we would have heard so many complaints like, oh my God, isn't it terrible that Ross is just, wrecking this guy and wrecking that guy. We just saw it again today in the Cup race here. And even the media trying to gin this whole thing up there with Kyle Larson and make it seem like there's going to be some other fight or something after what we saw with Noah Gragson in Kansas. But it's absurd. So and I don't know. It's just, I don't like the precedent it sets. I hope that maybe in the fall race at Darlington for the Xfinity series, they're not going to have a bunch of Cup guys in there messing it up, but almost certainly they're going to. We're going to have probably Kyle Larson in it. They're probably going to have William Byron in it, or have, Kyle Busch or any of these guys out there. And the problem is, and again, and we know this from the starting point here, that the Cup guys don't race the Xfinity guys the way the Xfinity guys race each other, because the Cup guys are there just to win. It's checkers or wreckers. So if you throw that into the equation with a bunch of Xfinity guys that maybe are going for points, whether it's a backmarker team that's trying to kind of stay up in the right rank in owner points to make sure that they can actually have either a guaranteed spot or an improved amount of the purse or whatever they're competing for, or if it's somebody that's actually trying to get a better seeding in the playoffs or make the playoffs to begin with, if you throw in some devil-may-care people that just, are just going in there to win and that's it, that really messes things up. You can do that in the Cup Series because that's the Elite Series, So, and again, I don't. That's why I scoff whenever the Cup Series guys are like, well, I don't like that this guy is in the Cup Series because he doesn't have enough experience and he's bouncing off everybody and all that. It's like, well, that's what you're doing in the Xfinity Series, in those cases. So, but in the Cup Series, that's as high as you can go. So, you're not going to have anything else other than somebody trying to actually get a win. And then if you're going to have a part-timer trying to make something happen. So I think that's entirely different. And especially if you got this now specialized car that's even attracting talent from other forms of motorsport, like your Formula One stars that we saw at Circuit of the Americas. But that's been a whole deal with that there at the same time. But yeah, we just saw wreck after wreck at the end of this one, kind of similar to the truck race there on Friday. Which is a shame because I thought I really liked the intrigue of the pit strategy that happened for a lot of this. Clean green racing, people having to kind of conserve their equipment, hearing a lot of, people breaking the throttle and, not trying to, not being able to just mash it all the way around the track, like really trying to kind of manage their run out there and stay in contention and race the racetrack. But unfortunately at the end, and what, usually happens, you get somebody that blows a tire or has a relatively minor incident in the last 20 laps, and then it's just going to be a free-for-all, and then we're going to have to split hairs about, who beat who to the finish, who beat who to the starting line, and, who got this guy in turn one. And, much like at the super speedways, it's so hard to really manage that at a track like Darlington, because, again, you have one groove that everyone's going to be going for, and you're going to get exactly what we got here, whether it's the incident that took out Truex, the incident that took out Chastain, and Chastain and Larson in the process, or even the Eric Jones situation was a bit different with the loose wheel there, but certainly these other incidents at the end of this one there, and it's unfortunate when it plays out that way, because I think the best Darlington races are ones where you have a long green flag run to the end, and everybody's car is kind of falling apart, and you're trying to beat somebody else. You watch some of these older clips, and they'll have, back when cautions weren't thrown for absolutely everything, you'd have a car that would bounce off the outside wall and then keep going, and somebody else, and then maybe try to kind of reel them back in, or maybe somebody, maybe both the leaders get into the wall. You think of Leroy Yarborough way back in the day, had a car that looked like somebody just literally grabbed the door and tried to rip it off with their bare hands, like some giant hand was trying to kind of rip it to pieces, and that was a race-winning car. So physical racing is certainly nothing new to the track, but usually it's been a marathon, not a sprint. And you still have drivers that are capable of actually catching each other without it. I thought we would have had something. It probably would have turned out about the same, with Larson up front there once Denny Hamlin pitted. If it stayed to the finish, at least that part would have stayed the same. Not obviously, it wouldn't have been Byron in that case. But it would have been interesting to see if they could have closed the margin any. We saw in the Truck Series race real good battles. Raja Karuth in particular was absolutely incredible in flying through the pack there and reeling in the leaders. And unfortunately, that rally was kind of stymied by all these restarts that happened at the end of it, and he ended up losing a few spots there at the end of that deal. But again, it goes back to the same green, white checker debate we've had since Circuit of the Americas, and you think about all the tracks with their treacherous first corners. I mean, every track has a bad first quarter when you can have one of these late race double file restarts, and knowing that whoever's just ahead of somebody by a fender, that's going to be enough for them to win, and that's it. And everybody else just goes home. But again, I will say, like I said at the beginning of this, Byron, I think, is one of the best drivers at figuring out that strategy and being able to capitalize on these short sprint runs. If you get a late race restart and he's anywhere in like the top 3 or top 5, I wouldn't bet against him. I think he's really made a name for himself with that. And if the championship comes down to that, or one of these elimination races this fall, and at that point, I would watch out. I don't think it matters particularly what track it is, whether it would be. I mean, the places he's won at already have been very different from each other. Darlington's very different from what we saw at Phoenix, for example. So yeah, I think that's another thing to certainly look at. But William Byron, your winner. Kevin Harvick, good run for him in second. I like the Sunny Delight paint scheme. It looked even better in person. I think that one looked gorgeous out there. I love the orange and yellow. I know not a perfect throwback to the AOL car, but that's a whole other deal there. Chase Elliott apparently got best in show. Probably not too surprising there given his popularity. Finishing in the 3rd spot. That was cool with Bill in the booth wearing the Evernham Motorsports shirt. And for him to see that and Chase be able to pull off that rally, that's good to see. Brad Keselowski in that beautiful John Force throwback there in the 4th spot. And Bubba Wallace really had a great run at the beginning, had a bit of adversity to overcome, but there were some onboards where you could see he was really gaining there. 5th place run for him, fantastic. And this is not an easy track to run well on. This is a track historically, I think they mentioned it in the broadcast, that he hasn't really done that well on. So again, tremendous effort for him. Harrison Burton takes the 6th spot there, that great version of the Jeff Burton throwback there on the number 21. Last Bro and I were kind of talking about this, about whether or not the color scheme they used was exactly accurate to the old one. It seemed like he kind of ran it. I know when they made it in diecast, they kind of did a couple things where one version was more pink on the hood, another one had a little bit more red in it, and it kind of went back and forth. But certainly an iconic scheme, still recognizable, I think, in one way or the other, even with a whole different team. Kyle Busch had a great run out there in the Lucas Mucus car there. Almost looked like he was going to be in position to perhaps sneak out a win there, just as he had when he last ran that scheme back at Fontana this year. But finishes back in the 7th spot. Justin Haley in 8th. I was just commenting during this race about how off Kaulig racing has been this entire year. Seems like either they're getting garage penalties or they're just not running that well. But a fantastic run for Haley there, finishing in the 8th spot. I'm not even sure if he's historically done that well at this track, even in the Xfinity series. It doesn't seem like it. But a great run for him. Ryan Blaney was up and around there. Seemed like he got plenty of screen time in that 12 car, finishing in 9th. And Chris Buescher rounding out the top 10 spots. Buescher always won. It's a great dark horse there to kind of look at there at the same time. Talking about Bill Elliott in the booth, I was really pleased with the selection of different people that they had in the booth for this, for sure. Kyle Petty, obviously, in stage 1, along with his father, Richard, was great to hear. I'm still working my way through Kyle's biography, and I'm intrigued by some of the stories he was still even sharing in this. Kyle, of course, a pro in the booth. He was great when he was with TNT and these other networks, and just an absolute natural. Many people were saying it, and I agree. I think he was. I think he carried that very well. Shared some a nice balance of historical and modern insight there into it. And again, one of the most consistent, I think, with his opinions too, which is good. It's very hard, I think, to find that, especially from a lot of these broadcasters, a lot of the guest analysts that they bring in there. So you had him on that. And then, of course, one of the stars of the show, bringing in Carl Edwards for stage 2. I thought he did a tremendous job. I think on par at least with Kyle Petty, maybe if not a little better. Certainly having a guy that, has more modern sensibilities with the sport, even though it sounds like he's not been racing at all. He's been working on a sailboat and just being kind of off the grid these last few years. And he seemed really happy. He seemed healthy as ever. He looked great to be there. I don't know how much of it was him just being happy to be there just for a change of situation, or if he was just genuinely engaged in what was happening out on the track. But tremendous for him. I thought he did a fantastic job in the booth. I would love to hear him up there again. I think he's comparable to at least like Kevin Harvick in providing good commentary up there. So I think there's a good group of guys that are, maybe either stepping out of the sport or just recently have be ones to watch. I'm not sure if Carl would do that. I think he's probably one reason he's happy is he stayed out of this as long as he had. But I'm glad that he was there as part of the ceremonies and they did this big deal with as many of the 75 greatest drivers as they could. You got guys like Sterling Marlin and Jeff Bodine out there. Dale Jarrett. I mean, a great group out there. And really cool to kind of hear from a lot of these drivers what they thought about the current racing. Jeff Bodine being very outspoken about Ross Chastain and people being too critical of his driving style there. Really saying like, look, I don't think a lot of these people even raced with Earnhardt. And in fact, really none of them have except for Ryan Newman coming back this weekend. That was another thing that was really exciting for sure. It was great to see Newman back at the track. He looked intrigued, I would say at least. He's always been kind of reserved, similar to Matt Kenseth there in terms of, what he's kind of thinking. Always had a little bit kind of a mischievous streak, much like Kenseth's had. But great to see him back out there. He had a great qualifying run for Rick Ware's team. Brought that car up into the 26th spot. Unfortunately, had a spin towards the end of the race there, dropped him back in the order. But still only 28th at the finish there, 4 laps down. Considering some of the other teams he beat, guys that were eliminated in incidents like Ross Chastain, Barry, Truex, and so forth. I think it's a decent return here too. And apparently he's going to run a few more races this year. Ran this race in hopes of competing in the All-Star event next week. At Wilkesboro and try to kind of get that minimum requirement there. Great to see. I think that's going to be certainly another thing to look at. And again, one of the other great throwback schemes that was out there in the field there too. They did a good job kind of replicating his first win car from New Hampshire way back in 2002 when he was going against Jimmy Johnson for the top rookie battles back then. Again, very physical race for sure. Very competitive race. A little more crashes than I would have liked there at the end. Would have been nice to kind of see a longer run at the end there, but it is what it is. And then when you're going to have a late race caution, you could almost be guaranteed there's going to be at least one more in that stretch run there at the end. And that's exactly what we had here at the end of this one. But again, congratulations to William Byron. Very well done. And a great bounce back from last year where he had that scuffle with Joey Logano, who also chased him into the outside wall. or I guess, or was it the opposite? It was Byron chasing Logano into the outside wall. Either way, there was enough. I guess this trend has kind of always been there. Maybe that's the racecraft of this modern car. But, it seems even more obnoxious than the bump and run in my book. But, it is what it is. I guess everybody else is fine with it. If somebody gets hip checked and spun out there, then it used to be people get usually pretty angry about that. You probably have somebody get a confrontation on pit road. Now I guess even if it's for the win, it's not the same thing. So that's kind of the look there. Looking back to the Xfinity race here, again, we're going to kind of buzz through things a little bit quicker here on the show. And again, thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll definitely hit as many of these points as possible. And I also have a bit of news for the YouTube channel this week in anticipation of the Wilkesboro race this next week. So we'll definitely want to get to that too. But we'll finish up the race reviews here in the meantime. The Xfinity Series race, heartbreak for Riley Herbst. Had that beautiful Ken Block tribute scheme out there. I thought that was it looked really nice. I like, again, the white accents on it. The tribute scheme to the old Fiesta that Ken drove in competition, and looked really good out there. But man, he was just snake bit from the start. Riley apparently bounced off the wall, or almost did, with some dirt on the tires, and then ultimately did bounce off the wall. That was enough to kind of take him out of the race there. Dropped him back in the order. Blaine Perkins with suspension issues. Had all kinds of problems with cutting down tires on that payday car. Again, this is always what seems to happen. You get like a race where you have some really beautiful throwback schemes, and they're hardly ever the ones that are actually going for the win. Unfortunately, it seems like some of the best schemes always end up at the back of the field. This was certainly the case in the Xfinity race there too. Not among them really the other three drivers in the bottom five here. Chandler Smith, Ryan Truex, and Brandon Jones involved in what was probably the biggest wreck of the weekend. There were some pretty big grinding wrecks in the Cup Series race today. But the Xfinity pile up there after both Austin Hill and Sheldon Creed spun out at the exact same time at the front of the field. Hill comes back to finish fourth. But Creed ends up with his car looking like a modified. And some very hard hits. Brandon Jones got collected there. Chandler Smith got the foam ripped out of the door. Thankfully, all the drivers okay. But those crashes completing the bottom five in that order. As the race winner, as mentioned, Kyle Larson pulled off the victory. His sixth win in the last 9 Xfinity starts. Somebody get this guy a Cup ride, because I think he's a little bit too good to be running in this series here. But I guess he's just going to keep doing it. So, he has to for his sponsor, HendrickCars.com. So Kyle Larson pulls off the win, which ruined what was a pretty good battle with John Hunter Nemechek. Just imagine if Kurt Busch and Ricky Craven, with all the focus on that battle at the beginning of this broadcast, imagine if Kurt Busch just kind of hip-checked Craven and just spun him into the inside wall. I guess people would still be excited by that finish, but it wouldn't be necessarily the same thing. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm just too... maybe I'm just not with the modern approach to these and all that. And as exciting as it is to have somebody wrecked out of second place coming off the last corner, and then swerve right back into traffic and almost take out somebody else. That was a little hair-raising there, but, John Hunter doesn't mind it. I guess I can only be so upset about it. But, again, I personally, as to, having some concerns about, again, the way these Cup drivers run against these lower division guys, and that they can do something like that with impunity, and everybody just going, yes, yes, oh gosh, that was so amazing. You're a Cup guy, and you still had to wreck this guy to actually win the race. And yeah, I know he was crowded against the outside wall. There was nowhere he could go, and he got bounced off the outside wall, but he shouldn't have even been there to begin with. That's what I keep coming back to. And I know I hammer on this every week, but I'm going to hammer on it this week because, hey, that's what I do. So there's that. Cole Custer in the third spot. Justin Allgaier took over second. John Hunter falls back to the fifth spot there. And fourth is Austin Hill. Carson Hocevar, very impressed with the run. Spire Motorsports finally gets their Xfinity car into the race. They had apparently pulled out of the Dover race because of the bad weather forecast. They didn't want to risk getting a costly DNQ that was going to kind of hurt their bottom line on that for sure. And it was good that they did, because they were able to prepare that car better, get it back out here. And Carson, once he worked his way up there with a little bit of strategy at the end, he was able to defend that spot. And I know Carson doesn't have a whole lot of fans, both on this show and otherwise. But credit where credit's due. That's only his second start, and not with maybe the absolute best team out there, but a fine showing out there, especially at a track where it was so physical between a lot of different drivers out there. So I think that was very impressive. Josh Berry in seventh, Sam Mayer in eighth, and then both the Sam Hunt Racing cars. First time the Sam Hunt Racing has had both its cars in the top 10 at the same time. Kaz Gralla, that beautiful fire department coffee machine, taking the 9th spot just ahead of Corey Heim in the 10th spot there in the gear wrench machine. Looking further back here, Brennan Poole, in between the two last place finishes in the Truck Series and the Cup Series, he gets into Garrett Smithley's car after Smithley failed to qualify. Heartbreaking for him. I hate to see Smithley struggle this much here, but they just kind of had a bad patch there between. Some of it's been some bad weather that wasn't his fault, but then other ones they've had just missed the show just by the smallest of margins. And then he's had ones where he's started the race and just gets involved in somebody else's mess, like we saw back at I believe it was in Atlanta a few weeks ago. Just heartbreaking on that. Hopefully they could bounce back. It was good, at least we could see the paint scheme out there. That Brennan Poole is able to run that in place of his backup car, but still back in the order there. Matt Mills in the Herbie car finished back in 28th spot. I don't think I saw it once during the Xfinity race, although my cable kept cutting out there, so I don't know exactly. I don't know if it got a lot more attention than I saw there, at least at the time. But finishing that race under power there is a good effort for them. Anthony Alfredo is impressed with him getting back into the race. The right front fender destroyed after he ran in the back of Parker Kligerman. Coming back to finish in the 15th spot there, the Dude Wipes Dale Jr. paint scheme. Good effort for him. Sammy Smith seemed like he almost didn't know where he was going at the beginning of the race. Had a couple spins. That Pilot Flying J entry, came back and finished in the 11th spot. Good recovery for a very young talent. This is a track that just destroys young talent. If you're, these newcomers that come in there, they hit those outside walls awfully hard, even if it's in the lower series versus the Cup Series. And it's happened to some of the best. I remember Kurt Busch having that issue his first time out here. But this case here, really bounced back from it and was able to salvage, I think, a decent run out of that program there as well. An unfortunate day for the RSS racing team. Ryan Sieg dropped some oil on the track there, it looked like. He was blowing up the last couple laps. I wonder if that had a factor in turns 1 and 2, where Kyle Larson caught John Hunter Nemechek in the first place. It's very possible. I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of discussion on that, but maybe that was the case there. Sieg was basically, had a big cloud of smoke behind him when the race was finishing up there. His brother, Kyle Sieg, involved in an incident on the backstretch, ends up going back in the order there as well. But, yeah, I mean, right up till the little bit of contact there at the end there that ended up, certainly deciding the win. I thought it was a very solid Xfinity race. Some interesting competition out there, and the Xfinity series is not only had kind of still the best race package overall, but again, some of the best paint schemes out there, and some stories there certainly brought about in between. Jumping now over into the Truck Series race, and I talked about him a little bit earlier, and I want to lead this off, even though he did not win the race. Raja Karuth had an absolute career night in Friday's Truck Series race, and I want to give a shout out to him for sure. Very impressed. He was in the late stages there. He was making some impressive moves, especially on the outside, kind of working his way up there. We saw he made the contact with Carson Hocevar and spun out his truck there. And then he was kind of closing up there. And he had said in his interview that he felt it was too bad that there were a lot of cautions at the end, because he felt like he was catching the leaders and Christian Eckes and Stuart Friesen there, and really looked like he was going to. I think if things played out exactly that way, we probably would have seen a pretty dramatic finish there, and it would have been interesting to see how things would have shaken out there. But I think a great comeback, especially after what we saw at Kansas last week. Raja had that tangle with Ty Majeski, was just a little too aggressive with his defensive maneuvers. I don't think it was anything that was, either, it wasn't one driver trying to take out the other driver. I don't think it was that case, because I know Raja and Ty Majeski don't seem to race particularly. I would say that they're the most aggressive, of the caliber of some other drivers out there. I think you just one zigged, the other zagged, and you had that situation. But unfortunately, it was a situation that dropped them out of what was going to be a good run. But with this one here, at a track even more difficult than Kansas, I would say, I think that really speaks well for that 24 team, and they're going to be ones to watch going forward. And then you had the bonus of apparently a member of Frank Scott, of William Wendell Scott's son, pushing the truck to the grid. Was really exciting there. So great weekend all around. I mentioned in my write-up there for Friday's race, it seems like that paint scheme is like good luck over at Darlington, because we saw Kyle Weatherman run so well in the Xfinity race there last year, running the same paint scheme with the number 34 for Jesse Iwuji Motorsports. So maybe that's a scheme we're going to see every year. I wouldn't be complaining, because it certainly looks good too, with the history of it. That being, of course, Wendell Scott's 1973 Mercury paint scheme that was unfortunately eliminated in a massive accident on the back straightaway at Talladega. It ended up being one of the last starts that Scott made in his Cup Series career. But your race winner was Christian Eckes in the Pan American victory car, the Herschel McGriff throwback for him. Great job by Eckes and the Bill McAnally team. Almost had both the McAnally trucks in the top 5. Jake Garcia was right up there. The Buckshot Jones throwback unfortunately got in a wreck that dropped him out of it there, so that was too bad. But really had a fine show for both of those efforts. And it was good to see, again, more attention brought really to McGriff's career and the efforts he's made over the years and the longevity that he's enjoyed. And it's good to see that get respected out there. And a really kind of distinct throwback out there. I think it came together very nicely. Stewart freezing to second spot. Tanner Gray still pounding on the door of trying to get his first career Truck Series win just as fast as ever, getting in the third spot. William Byron in fourth, shouldn't have been there. And the fifth place finisher was Carson Hocevar. Raja Caruth ends up back in the sixth spot, one spot ahead of Bubba Wallace. Corey Heim, Dean Thompson, and Caden Honeycutt. Both of those two drivers at the end of the top 10 definitely deserve a shout out too. Dean Thompson, his first career top 10 finish in the Truck Series, his first of the season here with the Tricon Garage effort. I mean, a great turnaround after all the terrible luck he's had beginning of this year, that big wreck at Texas, the emotions he showed back at Daytona earlier this year. It's good to see him get a fine showing out there, especially at a track as difficult as this. And then Caden Honeycutt, the number 20 truck without a sponsor, basically one of the only teams out there along with G2G that really rotates their drivers. And much like G2G, has had very limited sponsor out there. So we've seen Brad Perez bring sponsors over there, and he ran it at Martinsville. But we've also seen some bad luck from that team. Stephen Parsons got in the wreck of the Bristol Dirt Race and got last. Ed Jones from the IndyCar Series had a flat tire on the first lap at COTA and finished last. The 20 truck was involved in the Dean Thompson wreck, with Matt Mills being the one where his brakes went to the floor at the worst possible time. Every problem under the sun. They get Caden Honeycutt out there after getting that great run at the Bristol Dirt Race. He jumps aboard an unsponsored white truck and was absolutely flying up there. He's 16th or something coming into the final laps and ends up coming out the other side of it in 10th. Fine job from him. Definitely going to be interested to see what comes up here. I don't know how many more truck races he's going to do or, what the plans are there. But he's a talent. And Caden's one to certainly watch here. I'm very surprised that he parted ways with the Roper team. I don't know what the particulars were there. But hopefully he's on to bigger and better things and he can land a solid ride there and hopefully some sponsorship along the way at the same time. Nick Sanchez was just outside the top 10, the 11th spot. It was great to hear Mario Andretti in the booth. I thought he did a fine job out there. It was great to hear some of the stories from his stock car racing career on top of the, of course, his legendary open wheel career there at the same time. Certainly hearing from an Andretti in the month of May in a NASCAR race is very surprising, but that's a huge get for sure. And I think that was very entertaining during Friday night's broadcast there. Looking further back in the order, Timmy Hill was running solidly in the top 20. Unfortunately, he had a spin there towards the end that started a lot of these sequence of late race restarts. Hill back in the 24th spot. And then this week, this coming week, not this past week, as I had to correct myself in the entry list storylines, of course, Timmy will run the Jerry Hill throwback at the number 56, which will be very exciting for sure. So looking forward to that in this coming truck race. Further back in the lineup there, G2G Racing having another unfortunate week. While at Kansas, Brendan Poole got a 20th place finish there, while Tim Veens was out after just 2 laps, which was listed as a transmission, not an out-of-gas situation, which was originally what was reported to be. This time, both trucks end up in the final 2 spots. The engine let go in the number 46 there that Poole had. Looked like he got the back of somebody else, and the 47 was starting to blow up. They pulled the truck behind the wall. They said they didn't want to risk getting it back out there. I thought it was going to be listed as an overheating situation because they were talking about the water temperature and not refilling the radiator. But it's listed as a mechanical issue here, the 35th spot. And so both the G2G trucks are in the bottom 2 spots. Again, difficult stretch for that team. We'll see if they can turn things around at Wilkesboro. I'm sure regardless of program, you're probably going to have a lot of different Cup guys that are going to be trying to run that truck race. Hopefully not too many, but especially since the All-Star Weekend is going to have so many heat races and open races and so forth. The Cup guys are going to get plenty of laps out there. They don't need to be taking anything away from these truck guys where this is going to be the only shot they're really going to have at it for this year. Who knows what the plans are going to be next year. I'm hoping it's going to be a points-paying Cup race because I would certainly intend to cover that after our plans for this year kind of fell through. But that'll be another one to look at there for sure. The rest of your bottom 5, Parker Kligerman had an oil leak from almost the beginning of the race. Ultimately took him out of the event. Spencer Boyd with a fuel pump issue dropped him back to 33rd. And Chase Purdy rounded out the bottom 5 after he was involved in that one incident there, tearing up the Kyle Busch Motorsports Bama Buggies entry Purdy's still looking to try to get some solid runs under him. Unfortunately, his luck does not seem to have improved since he has made the move over from the GMS racing over to Kyle Busch Motorsports. But we'll see if things turn around from there. Ty Majeski on top of it had a steering issue, lost power steering, lost multiple laps, still finished the race under power in the 31st spot there. Lawless Allen in that beautiful Adam Petty throwback, unfortunately involved in an incident just after it was mentioned in the broadcast, and finishing in the 30th spot there. And that's being your run out there. So the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series articles are already posted. The Cup Series article, again, pending the results of post-race inspection, will be about the number 15 there, Brennan Poole, and the Bud Moore throwback. Very interesting thing, again, I mentioned briefly on Twitter there, the first time that the number 15 has finished last at a Cup race at Darlington since 1998, and during the Southern 500 in that September. And what's significant about that is that was actually the final last place finish that Bud Moore had as a team owner. He'd been in the sport many years, fielded cars, not just the 15 car that he was most known for, but also fielded cars for the late, great Joe Weatherly, who won the championships back in the 60s. Tremendous legacy in the sport. Sadly, no longer with us. Military veteran. I mean, he was part of the D-Day invasion. Just a tremendous life story there. And it's good to see, as simple as that 15 car looks, with just a white paint scheme, the 2 racing stripes, and the blue door numbers, still one of my absolute favorites. I hated to see it out of the race so soon. I have fond memories of, even when Ted Musgrave ran it in the waning days of that team in the 2000 season, and he ran it at Talladega, and unfortunately in that race, they also had bad luck, got involved in a wreck. It looked good on a Ford even back then. So 23 years later, still good to see it out there on a different deal. So that's another way to certainly look at that at the same time. Let me get into the super chats here at the same time. Let's take a look here. Thank you oh goodness, we got a few here. Thank you so much for the super chats here, folks. Let me get through these. Let me start with the first one here, Beast of Metal. I sometimes wonder if the minor incidents that keep setting off these late race melees are themselves a byproduct of the all-or-nothing mentality, i.e. a driver knowingly pushes past what they have. It's a very good point, because it does seem to happen an awful lot, and it doesn't happen in the same way. Sometimes it's a flat tire. Sometimes somebody just does actually bounce off the wall. Somebody just spins out. It could be any number of things. I mean, whether it's, and it does seem to be usually a driver that's not directly competing for the win, that they are further back in the lineup. That could be the situation. You could have a driver that's just kind of out of contention, and they really try too hard, but then the car, really can't do anything, or they can't do more. If it's a 15th place car, it's not going to be a 14th place car. And yeah, maybe that's a situation that happens. I'm not sure. I mean, you would always have that even without the playoff system, because you're still going to have situations where you have a driver that's trying to get the best run they can, and the car's the most wore out at the end. Brakes are bad, tires are bad, things are falling apart. It could just be a consequence of that. But the fact that we're seeing like single car incidents, yeah, I mean, maybe it is. I mean, maybe the pressure has ramped up that much, and you just see somebody get knocked out of line, and that's kind of the situation. Hard to say though. Let's see. Moving down here to the let me check on this too. But yes, thank you so much, Beast of Metal, for the super chat for sure. Let's see here. Bowser Jr. XD, yes, thank you for your super chat as well. Redemption for both Byron and the paint scheme. So yes, absolutely, very good point. Yeah, I mean, good to see the number 24 out there pulling off the win. I mean, he ran the flame paint scheme we saw last year, and unfortunately had that incident with Joey Logano, but this time around, showing a lot of heart to kind of get back in there. And yeah, redemption for the paint scheme back to, you think about the 1998 All-Star race, and the fact that he ran out of gas or something broke on the last lap of the race, lost the win to Mark Martin. Certainly a moment that's very big in Slapshoe's memory from the video that he talked about on the subject. But yeah, great to see for that the Chrome Illusion scheme. And I liked probably the thing I liked more than even just the color update. I like that they had the 75th anniversary logo where the 50th was back in 98 and kind of having that reference back. We saw this a little while ago with Jimmy McMurray doing the 50th anniversary scheme that Bill Elliott ran in 98, although that was before this year, of course, back when McMurray was active in the Cup Series. That was nice. I thought that was a good one to see, too. And I see your other one there, too, Bowser Jr. Thank you so much again, for sure. The super chat mentioning the margin of victory. Cup finish at a margin of victory of 0.781 seconds. That ranks 1,358th. Ironically, the only other race with this margin of victory is a 2012 Southern 500, which is the landmark 200th Hendrick Motorsports win. Very good statistic there, and thank you for bringing that up. Yes, Jimmy Johnson winning the 2012 Southern 500, the 200th Hendrick Motorsports win, a celebration that was delayed from that controversial Martinsville race where Clint Boyer spun out Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon on that late race restart after the David Rudiman situation. Yes, so you got the 100th win for the number 24, and the margin of victory down to the thousandths of the second matches the 200th Hendrick Motorsports win that was marked in 2012. So thank you so much for sharing that, Bowser. That's a very good point. And very interesting for sure. Let's see. Nicholas Gray, thank you for your super chat as well. I see nothing wrong with how Larson raced Ross today. We all know what to expect from the one, so why should he race him differently? Very good point. You know, again, Ross has been very aggressive, and I think we've seen the aggression step up from a lot of these other drivers, which is, again, why I think I can't help but notice that we had this Kansas race last week. Kyle Larson comes back from being spun out at the very beginning, gets back up there, has this great one-on-one battle with Denny Hamlin, and then on the final lap, you know, just one person scuffs the wall the wrong time, and maybe the margin was just that close. But regardless, it ended up being a situation where Larson gets wrecked and Hamlin pulls off the victory. And then we go this very next week. Larson goes out there and it's in the Xfinity Series race. And then he's the one that's in a situation with John Hunter Nemechek. They're going to have a great battle. They're going to kind of do this. It would just be great if they could just actually get across the line. It's not like the tires stuck better back then or something. I don't know exactly what the situation is. I only have to conclude that the racecraft has changed. In that sense. So now you got a situation where, Larson forces Nemechek into this other situation. He bounces off the outside wall, and Nemechek gets spun out, and that's the end of that. But you're talking more about the Ross Chastain situation in today's race. I don't blame drivers for being as aggressive as Ross has been when racing Ross, because they know that's what he's going to do. And we saw this with Joey Logano last year. As was mentioned in the broadcast here, that Logano has been every bit as guilty of that. And I think unlike Ross, he'll actually say, yeah, I did that. I'm going to race you just as hard as possible. He gets that helmet on, and that's what's going to be happening. So that's the situation that happens there. So that would be that'd be a different way to kind of look at that too. But a very good point. Yeah. I mean, I don't, of all the things from this weekend, I had really no problem with how Larson raced Chastain. I think that was good, hard racing too. I just hate when it comes to be a situation where these guys are going to just wreck each other. Like it just, you have to know, especially at Darlington, that, if you're going to squeeze somebody into the wall, you're going to be in a wreck. You're probably going to take yourself out. And there's so many wrecks you can watch from any era and any number of different cars that would happen that way with any number of drivers that would be just as aggressive. It used to be people would give each other a little bit of room just to avoid that. But we're not living in that time now. I think if there was ever any question about that, and I guess I'm sure the people that are making clip montages of all the times Kyle Larson has shouldered into somebody else, whether the Fontana race from last year or Watkins Glen, or the Talladega clip they showed with Chastain's win most recently last spring. I hate to be the common denominator type here, as we talked about last week with how Tony Stewart used to be accused of the same things back in like 2004. But I'm seeing a bit of a trend, but I don't think it's just Larson. I think we're seeing it, and I don't think it's just Chastain. And today we just saw an example of just two drivers that are perfectly willing to use the exact same strategy, and they just took each other out. And that was exactly the situation. And maybe one could look at the John Hunter Nemechek the same way. Although I think Nemechek, he's kind of been in a situation where he's taken himself out in incidents in the past, even in the truck series. But I wouldn't say about him taking out somebody else. I think he just races people really hard. We saw that in the Richmond race in the Xfinity series. I think it was last year. That kind of deal. But clean racing just isn't really rewarded now. I guess if you want to go down to everything, we even had the Truex versus Logano thing that took Truex out of the race. It's just everything has to be fought for so hard. And like Denny has always talked about in his podcast, the level playing field they've attempted to create has been so tight that they just can't get away from each other, and they're going to be wrecking each other. So that would be another way to kind of look at that too. So, but very good point, Nicholas, and you're right to raise that because again, I think Ross gets a lot of this attention. I was interested in hearing these other drivers, these retired drivers, saying why are they just giving him so much grief for this? You're seeing, again, Larson's done this a lot. We've seen Hamlin do this a lot. We've seen Logano do this a lot. It's becoming the racecraft of the sport. And I guess the real question we have to ask is when is it too much, or is it too much already? Or is there something that can be done? I think in this current system here where you can have a poor finish, you can win one or two races and you can wreck somebody else and keep them from winning. Or take somebody else out or something like that, and it has no bearing on you because at the end you're going to have these playoff points and regroup in the points where you're going to be. I don't know. I think that's, I don't know if we've reached that threshold. I don't know if we've reached the point where it's gone too far, but it's definitely reached the point where it's been a trend. I think it's a very visible trend, and I'm getting a little disappointed by it because I'd love to see a nice, again, we talk about this too, that we have this wonderful, montage about the 2003 Darlington finish and these two cars leaning off each other. And they were leaning off each other, but they weren't chasing each other into the wall. It's like, haha, I put you in the fence. Now I'm going to talk about a video game move. I'm going to stuff you in the fence and then you can't do anything about it, or I'm going to hook you. And that's the end of that. No, just good, hard. You want to talk about good, hard racing. It's a lot of passes, a lot of, bump. I think again, the bump and run is preferable. We saw a lot of that even in that finish in 2003. But just kind of the situation where you know what you're doing if you're chasing somebody into the wall and you're saying like, okay, well, you're going to make the guy back off, but who's going to be backing off when you're going against the leader in the last couple laps of a race? You're going to get exactly the situation, 10 times out of 10. And so I don't, that's where it becomes less surprising in that sense. But that's another thing to look at, for sure at the same time. Let's see here. Yeah, Newman's seat didn't fit him during the race. That was too bad. Sir Wrinklestein, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, that was, again, hopefully they get the seat adjusted for his next start. I assume it's going to be the All-Star race. That was the report I heard, is that he was going to be doing this to run that race next week in the Open, admittedly. I don't think his eligibility from his 2002 All-Star win would extend to now, but, we'll see how that shakes out. I talked about the Ken Block throwback earlier today for Riley Herbst. I have to also mention an interesting story from the Truck Series race, an unfortunate deal. Josh Realm had the throwback scheme on the number 33 in the Truck Series race. Unfortunately, didn't qualify for the race. Apparently, Keith McGee, who just returned back to Alaska after trying to kind of break into the sport down here, he was instrumental in getting that throwback scheme together and was going to be the driver for that truck this weekend, too. Apparently, Josh was very surprised by this, took over, put scuffed tires on the truck, and unfortunately wasn't enough for them to qualify. But really, again, another great throwback scheme. Unfortunately, people didn't get to see it compete on Friday night, but I thought they did a fine job with that. Again, wishing for the best for both Josh's team as well as Keith, for sure. And it's good to see also with the Riley Herbst deal that they did the whole merchandising thing, and it's like tied into Ken Block's foundation as well. The 43 Institute. So that's really cool. So this is the thing, one of the best aspects of Throwback Weekend. I mean, of course, you got the paint schemes, and unlike what was said about like, oh, you're supposed to immediately recognize it, I think it's sometimes better when you don't, because then you're going to want to look into it. You don't have to immediately recognize the paint scheme. I think the best ones are the ones that you do recognize, like the Ricky Rudd paint scheme on Suarez or stuff of that matter. But if it's something you maybe don't recognize right away, like the Herschel McGriff one, it makes you look it up. And in the internet age, that's fantastic because now you can look it up, you can learn more about the race, you can learn more about the driver, and that's what it should be. Then on top of that, you have the active drivers that are still around, and you bring them to the track, and so you get to talk to them directly. So that's huge. They have multiple different disciplines. If you have somebody that's much more recent, like Carl Edwards, or somebody that was just in there as a part-timer, like Mario Andretti, it's great to hear from them all. And then on top of all of that, for the drivers that are no longer with us, it's a tremendous opportunity to either do something that honors their legacy, or really kind of, respect or do a fundraiser for their organization. And I think that's great with the Ken Block ones there. I think that was a good effort with that. I hate that they had a bad run out there for Riley, and I hate that the Josh one didn't qualify because I know he touched a lot of people's lives, and unfortunately, that in racing, that's just kind of part of it there. If it was the best case scenario, they'd all win, but that's kind of the situation there. So we get that. And then also, of course, on top of all this, we have drivers that are retiring at the same season. That's another layer to Throwback Weekend. We saw tons of the Kevin Harvick throwbacks. Ironically, those seem to be better than the one that Harvick actually ran in the Cup race. But that's fine, because then you got to see the ones that they did for those Xfinity championships was really cool, as much as I wasn't a fan of especially the 2006 championship. But they were great looking. They're great looking cars out there. Ryan Ellis, among the other, not Andy Petrie. I think of the APR Alpha Prime Racing thing. They changed the logo, but of course these are Richard Childress throwback schemes. Those all looked great. I love Sage Karams in particular with the Childress CRC Chemicals car. So many great paint schemes this weekend. So many positives from this weekend. What my concerns are about the racing are things that transcend just this weekend. I think the positives far outweighed the negatives on this. And this kind of draws me to my final point here. And I am going to kind of cut the show a bit short here. We're not going to do trivia this week. I do apologize for those of you waiting for that. We will make up for that, believe me, next week for our North Wilkesboro show. And we'll do some more throwback stuff that weekend there as well. And bring up all that. The one concern that I have from this entire weekend, and I talked about this back during our Easter show here. I don't like that this race is on Mother's Day weekend. I really don't, because especially to have it be for Throwback Weekend, where you can have a lot of fun and you bring out I like to bring out the old merch and stuff like that and have fun with that. But Mother's Day is not the same as Father's Day, and I know not everybody's has the same relationship with their families or with their mothers, or have different relationships and all that. And no two people are the same. And maybe this is what's having the race on this weekend is maybe, being aware of that. But I'm not crazy about them having races on Mother's Day weekend. It's not the other, I mean, it's a number of things. The fact is that, there's not a lot of off weekends in the sport already. You already got people that have to spend a lot of time from, away from home. And we hear about this even during the off season, where you got people and crews that are working on these different drivers, working on this equipment over Christmas or Thanksgiving or anything else. And I know that NASCAR is looking for opportunities to promote the sport and take advantage of times in the schedule that maybe aren't as competitive because, you only have baseball to go against. You got, football's not playing right now, and things of that nature. But I really do think that this Throwback Weekend is not conducive to Mother's Day weekend. I think if anything, switch it to Father's Day weekend, where, believe it or not, there's no race on Father's Day weekend this year. Like, if you're going to do that, and I don't want to go too far. I mean, I know, people have different opinions on, on all this and everything like that. But I mean, they used to do like special, like Father's Day paint schemes and doing that stuff too. But Mother's Day should be there should be some separation there. And I really do think that, and of course there's mothers that are race fans. Of course, there are mothers that have drivers in their family and are supportive of it. But I think what really kind of struck me, and I was thinking about this, is, I think back to May 12th of 2000, which was just this past Friday when we lost Adam Petty. And that was a practice session that was for a race that was on a Saturday. It wasn't on Mother's Day. But I think maybe that's kind of had an effect on it too, because if you think about it, it's a really dangerous sport. And I think the way that is experienced by mothers is very different than the way that's experienced by fathers. I don't think I'm going too far in saying that. Thankfully this weekend, we didn't have anything serious happen. And that was, very good for that for sure. But I think for the longevity of this event and to still allow it to kind of be its own thing, I think it shouldn't be on Mother's Day weekend. I think it should have its own deal. Make it Father's Day weekend, or make it some other deal, some other time of the year. Throwback weekend is incredible. I've done it twice. When it was in September, I thought it was great. I understand the idea of making it a spring race, so this event can have its own thing, and that's great. I think that's for sure. But I don't think we should have NASCAR racing on Mother's Day weekend. I really don't. I don't think we should, and I think while we're at it, we shouldn't have it on Easter either. And I know everybody's got different beliefs, just like they have different family, situations, but it was always kind of an unspoken thing in the sport. So as we go into North Wilkesboro this week, and we're talking a lot more about the way the sport used to be, and I think NASCAR is really trying to find that balance between bringing in new fans and creating new traditions, and also bringing stuff back from the old. I think as critical as I am of NASCAR and the decisions that they make, I think more often than not, they've had the right intentions in mind. And I think that they did this to kind of experiment with it and see what it is. And I don't know what the ratings are. I mean, if, I'd say this now and then the ratings are massive, this is probably going to fall on deaf ears. But I think at some point there's something else that, that really shouldn't, it really shouldn't be part of this on that. So there's for that. Beast Metal, thank you for your super chat on that. I would be fine with this race being on the night before Mother's Day in the 2005 to 2013 timeframe, but holding on the day itself is a huge mistake. I agree. And then again, this has been kind of a creeping problem here too. And you're very right to bring that up. I mean, again, we used to have the Kansas race be on Saturday night on Mother's Day weekend. But it just doesn't feel right. I remember in 2007 when the Darlington race was on Saturday night and it got rain delayed to Sunday morning, and it didn't feel right having it on Mother's Day. It's like, that should be left alone. That should just be left alone. Some things should be maybe not held sacred, but just it's not conducive to it. I would have been perfectly happy doing all this stuff on a different weekend here, and I'm happy to do it talk about it on the show here tonight. So in the spirit of that, I'm going to cut the show off here, and that'll be it for tonight's show here. So, and again, happy Mother's Day to all of you out there, and that will be it for tonight. My Patreon is patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock, and my Twitter is @LastCarOnBrock. I do have big news. I did mention this, and I'm just realized I didn't mention this, so of course I'm not transitioning out of it very well. I do have new videos coming to the YouTube channel this week. So there's going to be plenty more content for you guys to enjoy this week coming up towards North Wilkesboro. I have a trailer that is going to be posted tomorrow, and it will give you further details. Those of you who are in the Patreon, you already know what I'm talking about, and it's going to be very exciting. So I can't wait to get that started. But first things first, again, happy Mother's Day, everyone. Enjoy the evening, and I will see you guys after North Wilkesboro next week. It feels exciting to say that. And we're going to have a lot of fun. We'll bring back trivia next week, and we'll have a good show. So have a great evening, everyone, and I'll see you all next time.